The morning sun pierced the tall, arched windows of courtroom 412, casting golden slants across the polished oak floor, where dust motes danced in the light. The air held the faint scent of wax polish and old paper, a familiar perfume in the family court's endless procession of broken bonds. At the heart of the room, behind a towering mahogany bench, sat Judge Emily Harper, her green eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, scanning the thick file before her. At 42, Emily was a titan in the judicial circuit, her reputation forged in the crucible of heartbreak, her rulings delivered with a precision that left no room for sentiment. Colleagues admired her detachment, but none knew the private wound that fueled it, a loss buried so deep it had become the bedrock of her resolve. Today's case was, on its surface, unremarkable, a foster placement fraying at the seams. The file was heavy, its pages worn and bulging with the story of an 8-year-old boy named Noah Carter. Emily's fingers lingered on the folder's edge, tracing its weight, a life distilled into bureaucratic shorthand, a narrative of rejection and resilience. She glanced up, her gaze settling on the small figure in the front row. Noah sat motionless, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. His faded gray jacket hung loosely on his slight frame, and his hands clutched a creased photograph, fingers pale with tension. Unlike the other children who passed through her courtroom, fidgeting, whispering, or staring with wide-eyed curiosity, Noah seemed to will himself invisible, a shadow in his own story. The silence shattered with a voice, polished but edged with exasperation. "Your Honor," Ellen Foster began, standing beside her husband, Richard, "we've done all we can, but Noah is difficult." Her pearl necklace gleamed under the fluorescent lights as she smoothed her silk skirt, a gesture that betrayed irritation more than concern. Emily's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger she quickly suppressed. 15 years on the bench had taught her every coded phrase for abandoning a child, every excuse cloaked in compassion. "Please elaborate, Mrs. Foster," she said, her tone even but laced with expectation, her pen poised over her notepad. Ellen hesitated, glancing at Richard, whose tailored suit and steady nod seemed to bolster her confidence. "He barely speaks," she said, her voice clipped, precise. "He refuses to join family activities, dinners, movie nights, even simple board games. When we try to include him, he just stares, vacant, like he's somewhere else entirely, not with us." Richard leaned forward, his baritone carrying the weight of authority, his hands clasped on the table before him. "We have 3 other foster children, Your Honor, all thriving in our home. They've adapted, bonded, become part of our family. But Noah, he's had outbursts that worry us deeply. They're disruptive, unsettling to the others." "What kind of outbursts?" Emily pressed, her eyes darting to Noah. His hands tightened around the photograph, knuckles whitening as if it were his only shield against the world. She wondered what it held, what memory it preserved for a boy so silent, so still. Ellen's tone turned clinical, detached, as if reciting a medical report. "He screams in his sleep, night after night, waking the household. 2 weeks ago, we found him hiding in the garage at 2 a.m., crying, clutching that picture. When we tried to calm him, he panicked, threw a wrench, screamed at us to stay away. It was alarming, Your Honor." Emily leaned forward, softening her voice as she addressed the boy directly, her words gentle but deliberate. "Noah, would you like to tell me how you're feeling about all this?" Her question hung in the air, unanswered, a pebble dropped into a still pond. Noah didn't move, didn't look up. His silence was a fortress, unyielding, built from years of disappointment and distrust. Clara Evans, the social worker seated beside him, touched his shoulder gently, her kind face etched with the fatigue of too many cases, her eyes shadowed with empathy. "Noah hasn't spoken in weeks, Your Honor," Clara said, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "His trauma specialist believes it's a coping mechanism, a response to his experiences in previous placements. He's shutting down to protect himself." Emily flipped through the file again, her stomach twisting as she counted the entries: 6 foster homes in 8 years, each ending in rejection, each leaving a mark on a boy too young to bear them. The reasons were vague: behavioral issues, failure to attach, disruptive tendencies, but the pattern was stark, a litany of abandonment. There was no record of Noah's biological parents, only a cryptic note buried in the paperwork: entered foster care as infant, circumstances unclear, records incomplete. The morning light shifted, casting Noah's face in shadow, and Emily found herself studying him more closely than usual. His delicate features, the faint freckles across his nose, the dark curls framing his forehead, the curve of his jaw, stirred something in her, a sensation she couldn't name, like a melody half-remembered from a dream. Turning back to Ellen, Emily let a slight edge creep into her voice, her patience thinning. "Mrs. Foster, you claim Noah refuses to bond with your family. Have you considered that his silence might be a plea for help rather than defiance? A child with his history doesn't shut down without reason." Ellen's lips pursed, a flash of annoyance crossing her face before she schooled it into practiced concern, her fingers tightening on her purse. "With all due respect, Your Honor, we're experienced foster parents. We've raised dozens of children successfully, helped them heal, thrive. We know the difference between a child who needs support and one who simply won't accept it." Richard cleared his throat, adjusting his gold cufflinks with a flourish, his posture radiating confidence. "We've provided Noah with everything: private school enrollment at St. Andrews, weekly therapy sessions with a top specialist, a bedroom with brand new furniture, even a tutor to help him catch up academically. We've spared no expense, no effort. But he shows no gratitude, no desire to be part of our family, no willingness to try." Emily suppressed a surge of anger at their materialistic measure of care, their assumption that possessions could mend a fractured spirit. She was about to respond, to challenge their shallow metrics, when Noah's head lifted, his dark eyes meeting hers for the first time. The intensity of his gaze struck her like a physical blow, a mix of recognition and longing that made her heart race unexpectedly. Those eyes, hauntingly familiar, like a reflection of her own in moments of quiet sorrow, triggered a wave of unease, a crack in her carefully maintained detachment. She pushed the thought aside, reminding herself to stay professional, to anchor herself in the law, not in fleeting emotions. The Fosters' lawyer, Edward Langston, stepped forward, his tailored suit and confident stride signaling countless victories in family court. His silver hair gleamed under the lights, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Your Honor," he began, "my clients have provided extensive documentation of Noah's behavioral issues, recurring night terrors, selective mutism, emotional outbursts that have disrupted their household. These challenges make him an unsuitable match for their family, particularly given their responsibility to their other foster children." Emily's fingers drummed lightly on her desk, a rare sign of agitation, her composure strained. "Mr. Langston, your client's committed to providing a stable home for a child who has experienced significant trauma. The behaviors you describe, night terrors, withdrawal, are not unusual for someone with Noah's history. They're symptoms, not defects." Nevertheless, Langston persisted, unfazed, his hands clasped behind his back. "The Fosters have other foster children to protect, children who are flourishing under their care. Noah's presence disrupts the harmony of their household, and surely you can understand their position, their need to prioritize the well-being of the whole family." Emily felt a headache building behind her eyes, a dull throb born of frustration and something deeper, something she couldn't yet name. She turned to Clara, seeking clarity amid the noise. "Ms. Evans, what alternative placements are available for Noah at this time?" Clara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands tightening around her notepad, her voice hesitant. "Given his history, Your Honor, immediate placement might be challenging. He's been through so many transitions, and his current needs are complex. He'd likely need to return to the group home temporarily while we search for a new foster family, one equipped to handle his trauma." Noah's hands began to tremble at the words group home, the photograph crinkling under his grip, its edges curling inward. Emily caught a glimpse of its surface, faded, yellowed, as if it had been handled thousands of times, a relic of survival. A detail tugged at her mind, the texture of the paper, the particular shade of aging, but it slipped away before she could grasp it, like a dream fading at dawn. "I see," Emily said, forcing her attention back to the legal matter at hand, though her eyes kept returning to Noah, his presence pulling at her consciousness like a tide. She noticed small details others might overlook, the scuff marks on his sneakers, hinting at the limits of the foster's generosity, the way he glanced at Clara whenever voices rose, as if bracing for trouble, the barely perceptible tremor in his hands when Richard shifted in his chair, a subtle flinch that spoke of learned fear. Langston presented additional documents, his movements precise as he laid them before the bench, a school report detailing Noah's declining grades, a therapist's note describing his resistance to attachment, a pediatrician's letter expressing concern about his emotional stability. The papers painted a picture of a troubled child, but Emily saw through the clinical language, recognizing the symptoms of a boy who'd been failed, not one who'd failed others. She was about to call a recess, needing space to process the strange pull she felt, when the moment came that would change everything. Noah stood abruptly, his movement so unexpected that Clara grabbed his arm reflexively, her hand gentle but firm. The photograph fluttered to the floor, landing face down, but Noah didn't seem to notice. He stared directly at Emily, his eyes wide with a fierce, unreadable emotion, hope, fear, certainty all at once. When he spoke, his voice was small but clear, carrying easily in the hushed courtroom, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "You're my mom." The words hung in the air like a struck chord, reverberating through the room, shocking in their clarity and conviction. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, a ripple of astonishment passing through the sparse audience, court clerks, attorneys, a few onlookers who'd wandered in. The Fosters exchanged alarmed glances, Richard's hand tightening on Ellen's arm, his jaw set. Clara tried to guide Noah back to his seat, whispering reassurances, but he stood firm, his gaze locked on Emily, unyielding. "You're my mom," he repeated, stronger now, as if the truth had found its voice, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to say it. Emily gripped the edge of her bench, her knuckles turning white, the wood cool against her palms. The blood drained from her face as the room seemed to spin, a dizzying tilt that threatened to pull her under. Memories long buried surged to the surface, a sterile hospital room, a nurse's sympathetic eyes, a loss that had redefined her life 8 years ago. The photograph lay face down on the courtroom floor, its secret hidden, a silent witness to the moment. Ellen's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and accusing, her composure fraying. "Your Honor, this clearly demonstrates his instability. He's delusional, making up fantasies to manipulate the situation." "Court is in recess," Emily managed, her voice barely steady, cracking at the edges. She rose quickly, gathering her black robes around her like armor, her movements mechanical. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour." As she retreated to her chambers, she felt Noah's gaze follow her, his words echoing in her head, stirring emotions she had worked so hard to bury. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, muffling the courtroom's commotion, but nothing could silence the question now burning in her mind: could Noah be right? Could he be her son? In the dim sanctuary of her chambers, Emily leaned against the door, her breath shallow and uneven, her heart pounding like a drumroll in her chest. Noah's words, "You're my mom," reverberated, each syllable a hammer against the vault where she'd locked her grief 8 years ago. The impossibility of his claim clashed with the strange pull she'd felt in the courtroom, the haunting familiarity in his eyes, like a mirror reflecting her own sorrow. She crossed to her desk on unsteady legs, sinking into the leather chair, her hands trembling as she reached for the bottom drawer. It was locked, as always, a precaution against prying eyes, a barrier between her public self and her private pain. She fumbled with the key, her fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and opened it to reveal a small wooden box, its edges worn from years of secret handling, its surface etched with faint scratches from restless nights. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the lid, fear and longing warring within her. Inside lay relics of a life she'd tried to leave behind, fragments of a grief that had never fully healed, that still woke her in the small hours with its weight. Steeling herself, she opened the box, the hinges creaking softly. A hospital bracelet, its ink faded but legible. Harper, Emily, Crestview Hospital, May 12, 2017. A tiny knit blanket, blue and soft, folded neatly, never touched by the child it was meant for, its edges frayed from her own anxious fingers. And a death certificate, its stark words a wound that still ached, a blade that had never dulled. Nathan Harper, stillborn, May 13, 2017. Her son, gone before she could hold him, before she could memorize his face or feel the warmth of his breath against her skin. Emily had been 34 then, newly widowed after her husband, David, died in a construction accident, a collapsed scaffold that stole him just 4 months before their son was due. Pregnant and alone, she'd poured her hope into Nathan, her unborn child, decorating a nursery with star-patterned curtains and a mobile that played Brahms' Lullaby, choosing his name after her father, a man who'd taught her to face the world with courage. The pregnancy had been grueling, severe morning sickness that landed her in the hospital twice, weeks of bed rest that left her restless and afraid, but she'd persevered, driven by the promise of her son, by the flutter of his kicks under her palm. Then, at 36 weeks, the complications came, a sudden spike in her blood pressure, a rush of medical staff, the sharp fear of an emergency C-section. She'd woken hours later, groggy and hollow, to a nurse's gentle voice, "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Harper. Your baby didn't make it." The nurse, her face blurred in memory, her name lost, had been insistent, almost forceful, urging Emily not to see the body, claiming it would be too traumatic, too devastating. Emily, shattered and sedated, her mind clouded by medication and grief, hadn't fought. They'd pressed forms into her hands, guided her signature with practiced efficiency, and sent her home empty, her arms aching with absence. She'd rebuilt her life around that loss, dismantling the nursery piece by piece, selling the crib, donating the clothes, keeping only the box as a quiet memorial. She'd channeled her pain into her work, rising through the ranks to become Judge Harper, the unflinching guardian of courtroom 412, protector of children who, like her son, had no one else. But Noah's words had cracked open that sealed vault, letting doubt spill out like water through a broken dam, cold and unstoppable. She closed her eyes, memories flooding back, the hospital's sterile smell, sharp with antiseptic, the weight of her empty arms as she left Crestview, the silence of the nursery she'd locked away. Noah's eyes, those dark, searching eyes, so like her own in moments of quiet reflection, challenged everything she'd believed. Could it be possible? A mistake, a lie, a theft. The coincidence was unthinkable, yet his certainty, his photograph, refused to be dismissed, refused to let her retreat to the safety of denial. A knock startled her back to the present, sharp and insistent. Clara Evans stood in the doorway, her expression a mix of concern and urgency, her brown eyes searching Emily's face. "Your Honor, are you okay? You look pale." Emily composed herself, slipping the box back into the drawer and locking it with a click, her movements deliberate, a shield against vulnerability. "Come in, Clara." "Where's Noah?" With a court assistant in the children's waiting room, Clara said, closing the door behind her, her steps soft on the carpet. "He's quiet, but he's clutching that other picture he has, the one he wouldn't show me. Judge Harper, I've never seen him act like that, standing up, speaking out, claiming you as his mother. In all his placements, he's never done anything like it, never shown that kind of conviction." "Tell me everything you know about his background," Emily said, her voice sharper than intended, betraying the storm raging inside her. Clara opened her thick case file, its pages worn from frequent handling, and began flipping through them with practiced ease, her fingers pausing on key documents. "Noah entered the foster system as an infant," Clara began, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "The records from that time are frustratingly incomplete, no birth certificate, no medical history, just a form from Bright Futures Agency stating he was surrendered by an unnamed mother. They placed him in his first foster home at 3 months old, with a couple named the Harrisons." Emily's mind flashed to Crestview Hospital, the haze of that terrible day, the nurse's voice echoing in her memory. "Bright Futures Agency," she repeated, the name heavy on her tongue. "What do we know about them?" "They were a private adoption and foster care organization," Clara said, pulling out a clipped report, its edges yellowed. "They operated for nearly 2 decades, placing hundreds of children, mostly infants and toddlers. They shut down 4 years ago amid allegations of financial misconduct, missing funds, falsified expense reports, rumors of bribes. Their records are a mess, scattered or deliberately destroyed. Noah's file is one of the few that survived, but it's maddeningly vague. His first placement, with the Harrisons, lasted 15 months before they returned him, citing excessive crying and sleep disturbances." Emily's stomach churned, her fingers tightening on her pen. "He was an infant. Crying is normal, expected." Clara nodded, her expression grim, her hands still on the file. "Exactly. The Harrisons were what we call serial fosters, taking in babies for the support payments, then moving them along when the work got hard, when the kids stopped being easy. After them, Noah went through 5 more homes, each one ending the same way, vague complaints about behavior, quick rejections with little follow-up. The reasons vary: won't bond, too withdrawn, disruptive outbursts, but there's no substance, no real documentation of what went wrong." "And his biological parents?" Emily asked, though she dreaded the answer, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Nothing," Clara said, shaking her head, her ponytail swaying slightly. "The file just says, circumstances of entry unclear. No names, no history, no trace of where he came from. It's as if he appeared out of nowhere, dropped into the system with no past." Emily stood, pacing behind her desk, her robe swishing softly against the floor, her mind racing. 8 years ago, Clara, I was pregnant. It was a difficult pregnancy, complications, hospitalizations, constant worry. Near the end, my blood pressure spiked, and they rushed me into an emergency C-section. When I woke up, her voice caught, the memory a knife twisting in her chest, sharp and unrelenting. They told me my son was stillborn. I never saw him, never held him, never even heard him cry. Clara's eyes widened as the implication landed, her breath catching. The timing matches, she said softly, almost a whisper, her hands stilling on the file. Yes, Emily said, stopping to face her, her hands gripping the back of her chair for support. But there was a death certificate. I saw it, signed it, held it in my hands. They said he was gone, that seeing him would only make it worse, that it would break me. She paused, a new memory surfacing, jagged and raw, like a shard of glass. There was a nurse, she kept insisting I shouldn't see the body, kept saying it would be too traumatic, that I needed to focus on healing. I was too shattered to fight, too lost to question. Clara leaned forward, her file forgotten, her voice urgent. What are you saying, Judge Harper? That Noah could be. I don't know yet, Emily admitted, her voice trembling, her composure fraying at the edges. But his words, that photograph he's holding, it's stirring something, Clara. I can't ignore it, can't dismiss it as coincidence. She took a steadying breath, her judicial mind kicking in, anchoring her to action. I need you to do something for me. Find out everything you can about Bright Futures Agency, leadership, board members, funding sources, any connections to Crestview Hospital. Dig deep, leave no stone unturned. What about Noah? Clara asked, her voice gentle, her eyes searching Emily's face. The Fosters won't take him back, and the group home. No, Emily cut in, her tone firm, final, a mother's resolve overriding her judicial restraint. He's not going back to a group home. Find him an emergency placement for tonight, somewhere safe, with someone who won't see him as a problem, who'll treat him with kindness. Tomorrow morning, I'm hiring a private investigator. Clara nodded, gathering her papers with a quiet resolve, her movements swift but careful. I'll make it happen, Your Honor. I've got a foster parent in mind, a woman I trust, who specializes in short-term care for kids like Noah. Anne. Judge Harper. I hope you find the answers you need, whatever they are. As Clara left, Emily sank back into her chair, the weight of possibility pressing against her chest, heavy and unyielding. Noah's eyes, his certainty, the photograph she hadn't yet seen clearly, they were threads in a tapestry she didn't understand, but one she could no longer ignore. She glanced at the clock on her desk, its ticking a relentless reminder of the hour ticking down until she'd face the courtroom again, face Noah, and confront the possibility that her carefully ordered world was about to unravel into something unknown, something terrifying, something that might just be a miracle. The courtroom was empty when Emily returned, the bailiff having cleared it for the recess, leaving only the echo of Noah's words and the faint hum of the ventilation system. The silence was oppressive, a stark contrast to the chaos of moments before. She crossed to the front row, where Noah had stood, her footsteps soft on the linoleum, and knelt to retrieve the fallen photograph. Her robes pooled around her, a dark cascade against the pale floor, and her fingers closed around the picture, trembling slightly as she lifted it. She turned it over slowly, her breath catching in her throat, a sharp intake that echoed in the quiet. It was her, younger, sitting under a blooming magnolia tree in Riverside Park, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly, her face glowing with anticipation. She wore a simple sundress, its floral pattern bright against the green grass, and her smile was unguarded, captured by David's old Nikon just weeks before his accident stole him away. She remembered that day vividly, the warm spring air, heavy with the scent of blossoms, the laughter they'd shared as David teased her about her waddle, the flutter of Nathan's kicks under her palm, a secret conversation between mother and son. It was the last moment of unshadowed hope, before grief became her constant companion, before her world tilted into darkness. She stood, clutching the photo, her mind racing, questions tumbling over one another like stones in a river. How had Noah gotten this? What did it mean? Why this picture, of all the moments in her life? Back in her chambers, she placed it on her desk, staring as if it could speak, could unravel its secrets. The paper was worn, its edges soft from years of handling, suggesting it had been a lifeline for Noah through his 6 foster homes, a talisman against the loneliness of his journey. The thought pierced her, how many nights had he held it, alone in strange beds, searching for a truth no one believed, clinging to a mother he didn't know. Another knock came, urgent and insistent, pulling her from her thoughts. Clara stood in the doorway, her expression a mix of worry and determination, her hands clasped tightly. "Your Honor, Noah's asking for you. He's scared, clinging to that other picture he has, the one he wouldn't show me earlier. I think he needs to see you, to know you're still here." Emily nodded, slipping the park photo into her pocket, its weight a quiet anchor. "I'd like to speak with him privately, Clara. Can you bring him to the meeting room? You can stay nearby if he needs you, to make sure he feels safe." Clara hesitated, her professional caution warring with her instincts, her brow furrowing slightly. "Given what he said in court, are you sure it's wise? I don't doubt your intentions, but—" "I know it's unusual," Emily interrupted gently, her voice calm but firm. "I just want to understand what he's feeling, what he knows, why he said what he did. I promise I'll keep it appropriate, Clara. I won't push him." The meeting room was a small, brightly lit space tucked away from the courtroom's formality, designed to ease young fears. Its walls were covered with children's drawings, stick figures holding hands, rainbows arching over lopsided houses, hopeful scribbles in crayon and marker. Noah entered, his jacket still too big, swallowing his slight frame, clutching another photograph, older and more worn than the first. His eyes found Emily's immediately, that same intense recognition making her heart skip a beat, a jolt that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. "Hello, Noah," she said, softening her voice to a near whisper, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze. "Would you like to sit down?" He moved cautiously to a chair, his fingers tightening around the picture as if it might vanish, his movements deliberate, like a deer stepping into an open field. Emily sat across from him, keeping her posture open, non-threatening, her hands folded loosely in her lap. "May I see what you're holding?" Slowly, Noah extended his hand, his trust a fragile thing, a thread stretched thin. The photo showed Emily leaving Crestview Hospital, her face drawn with grief, her eyes hollow and red-rimmed, her navy wool coat, David's last gift, clinging to her like a shroud. She remembered that moment, stumbling out of the hospital, the world blurred by tears, her arms aching with emptiness, the weight of loss pulling her to her knees. On the back, in neat, unfamiliar handwriting, "Your real mom, don't forget." Emily's hand shook as she studied it, the image a punch to her chest, a memory she tried to bury. "Where did you get this, Noah?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with the effort to stay composed. "Miss Lila gave it to me," he said, his words soft but clear, like a stream finding its path through stone. "At my second foster home, the one with the big dog that barked all night. She said she worked at the hospital where I was born. She said they lied to you, made you think I was gone." Emily's pulse quickened, a mix of hope and dread surging through her, her fingers tightening on the photo. "Do you remember Miss Lila's last name?" He shook his head, his curls falling into his eyes, obscuring them momentarily. She left after giving me the picture. The other foster parents said she got fired, said she was crazy, that I shouldn't listen to her stories. Emily leaned forward, careful not to push too hard, her voice gentle but probing. Can you tell me more about her? What was she like, Noah? Noah's voice was small but steady, his eyes fixed on the photo in her hand, as if it held the answers he sought. She was nice. She had gray hair, but not old gray, just shiny, like silver. She read me stories, ones about knights and dragons, castles in the clouds. She didn't yell, not like the others, and she gave me extra cookies when no one was looking. She said my real mom loved me, that I should keep the picture safe, hide it so no one would take it. He paused, his fingers tracing the edge of his chair, a nervous habit. She said one day I'd find you, that I'd know it was you when I saw you, like a light turning on. Emily's throat tightened, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, threatening to spill. She placed the photos side by side, the park, radiant with hope and promise, the hospital, shadowed with loss and despair. They were bookends to a story she didn't yet understand, but one that felt impossibly personal, a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit the narrative she'd lived for 8 years. Before she could speak, a knock interrupted, firm and professional. Dr. Thomas Ellis, a court-appointed child psychologist, entered with Clara, his clipboard tucked under his arm, his glasses perched low on his nose. Your Honor, Dr. Ellis began, his tone measured, professional, we need to discuss Noah's temporary placement. The Fosters have formally relinquished custody, and we need to ensure he's in a stable environment while we sort out next steps. Emily looked at Noah, seeing fear creep into his eyes at the word placement, his shoulders tensing, his hands clutching the photo tighter, as if bracing for another rejection, another uprooting. She made a decision that would surely raise eyebrows, perhaps questions about her impartiality, perhaps whispers in the judicial corridors, but she couldn't send him away, not now, not when his words had shaken her to her core. He'll stay with me tonight, she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument, a mother's resolve overriding her judicial restraint. Clara can stay to maintain proper protocol, to ensure everything's documented correctly. Dr. Ellis frowned, his brow furrowing, his pen pausing mid-air. Your Honor, given the circumstances, his claim, your involvement in the case. I'm not speaking as a judge right now, Emily said, her tone resolute, unwavering, her eyes locked on his. I'm speaking as someone who sees a child in pain, who needs answers as much as he does. Noah's been through enough, 6 homes, 6 rejections, 6 promises broken. He's not spending tonight in a group home or with strangers who don't understand him. Clara nodded, her eyes warm with understanding, a quiet ally in the moment. I'll stay, Your Honor. I'll make sure it's all above board, recorded properly for the file. Dr. Ellis sighed, adjusting his glasses, but didn't push further, sensing the steel in Emily's voice. Very well. I'll note it in the report. We'll reconvene tomorrow to finalize his placement, discuss long-term options. As they left, Emily turned to Noah, who was watching her with a mix of hope and wariness, his small frame still tense. You're coming home with me tonight, okay? She said, softening her voice, offering a smile she hoped was reassuring. Just for now, until we figure things out together. Noah nodded, a small gesture, but his eyes held something new, a flicker of trust, fragile but real, like the first green shoot breaking through frozen ground. Emily's home was a haven of warm wood and soft light, a sanctuary carved out of her years of solitude, a stark contrast to the cold formality of courtroom 412. The guest room, with its blue quilt embroidered with silver stars and curtains patterned with crescent moons, was a space designed for comfort, a place where a child might feel safe, might dare to hope. Noah stood in the doorway, clutching his small canvas bag, its straps frayed from years of being carried from home to home. His eyes were wide as he took in the room, the plush cream rug, the bookshelf filled with colorful spines of children's books, the glow of a nightlight shaped like a sleeping fox, casting a gentle amber warmth across the walls. Clara helped him unpack, her movements gentle, her voice a soothing murmur as she set his few belongings, a worn stuffed lion, a toothbrush, a single change of clothes, on the dresser. "He's settling in better than I expected," Clara whispered to Emily as they stood in the hall, watching Noah place his sneakers neatly by the bed, aligning them with care, as if order could ward off chaos. Usually, first nights in a new place are rough for him, tears, panic, sometimes hours of rocking himself to sleep. But here, he's calm, almost at ease. Emily nodded, her mind still on the photographs, the weight of Noah's words pressing against her like a storm cloud, heavy with unspoken truths. "Thank you for staying, Clara," she said, her voice low, grateful. "I know this is outside the norm, that it's bending rules we're supposed to follow." Clara smiled faintly, her exhaustion softened by sincerity, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "I've seen a lot in this job, Judge Harper, kids like Noah, carrying more than anyone should, hurt in ways that don't show on the outside. Something about what happened today, what he said in that courtroom, it feels different, like a door opening. I trust your instincts, and I trust him." In her study, Emily pulled out the wooden box again, its weight familiar in her hands, a quiet ritual of remembrance. She laid the hospital bracelet, blanket, and death certificate beside Noah's park photo, the images and documents staring back at her, a silent challenge to everything she'd believed for 8 years. The bracelet was a thin strip of plastic, its edges curling from age, her name and date still legible in faded ink. The blanket was soft, untouched, a promise unfulfilled. The death certificate was clinical, its language cold, stillborn, no autopsy required, maternal signature, a lie, perhaps, that had shaped her life. Noah's picture, with her smiling under the magnolia, told another story, one of hope stolen, of a bond that might never have been broken. She picked up her phone and dialed Daniel Reed, a private investigator she'd worked with on cases involving missing records, hidden assets, and buried truths. His voice was steady, professional, but curious when he answered. "Emily, it's late. Everything okay?" "Daniel, I need you to dig into Crestview Hospital records from May 2017, she said, keeping her voice low, her words measured to hide the tremor beneath. "Focus on the maternity ward, stillbirths, emergency deliveries, anything irregular, any discrepancies. And I need everything you can find on Bright Futures Agency, leadership, funding, any ties to the hospital, any whispers of wrongdoing." There was a pause, the sound of Daniel shifting, perhaps sitting up straighter. "This sounds personal, Emily. What's going on? You sound shaken." She hesitated, the words catching in her throat, raw and unformed. "It might be. I'll explain when I know more, when I have something solid. Just move fast, please, Daniel. I need answers, and I need them yesterday." "Got it," he said, his tone shifting to businesslike resolve. "I'll start tonight, pull some strings, call in favors. You'll hear from me by morning, maybe sooner." Next, she called Dr. Rachel Klein, chief of pediatrics at City Medical, a friend from her law school days who'd always been a voice of reason, a steady hand in crises. "Rachel, I need a favor," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly, betraying her fear. A DNA test, rush basis, completely confidential. No records, no leaks. Rachel's tone shifted from warm to concerned, her voice sharp with worry. Emily, what's happening? Are you okay? Is this about a case? I can't explain yet, Emily said, her voice catching, a tear escaping despite her efforts. But I think my son might be alive, Rachel. I need to know, need to be sure. There was a long pause, then Rachel's voice, firm with resolve, cutting through the silence. I'll make it happen, Emily. Send me the samples tomorrow morning, hair, saliva, whatever you can get. I'll push them through myself, keep it off the books. You know I'm here, whatever you need, no questions until you're ready. As night fell, Emily stood in her study, the weight of the day pressing down like a storm cloud, heavy and unyielding. The photographs lay on her desk, their images a silent challenge to everything she'd believed for 8 years, her pregnant hope, her grieving despair, now joined by a boy who claimed her as his own. A soft sound made her turn, her breath catching. Noah stood in the doorway, barefoot in borrowed pajamas too big for him, tears glistening on his cheeks, his stuffed lion dangling from one hand. Bad dream, he whispered, his voice barely audible, trembling with fear. Without hesitation, Emily opened her arms, kneeling to his level, her heart aching for him. He came to her slowly at first, his steps hesitant, then all at once, burying his face in her shoulder, his small body trembling against her. She held him tightly, feeling the fragility of his trust, the weight of his pain, her arms a shield against the world. Instinctively, she began humming a lullaby her mother had sung to her, its melody simple and soothing, a thread of comfort woven through her own childhood, a song she'd sung to Nathan in quiet moments of pregnancy. To her shock, Noah hummed along, his voice faint but sure, matching her note for note, a harmony that felt like a miracle. She pulled back slightly, her heart pounding, her eyes searching his. "How do you know this song, Noah?" she asked, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. He looked up, his eyes wet but steady, shining in the dim light. "I remember it," he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder, soft but certain. "From before, when you sang to me, in your tummy. Miss Lila said you sang it all the time, that it was our song, yours and mine." Emily's heart stuttered, tears sliding down her cheeks as she held him closer, her fingers stroking his hair, his curls soft under her touch. The lullaby, her mother's gift, her solace during those long months of pregnancy, had been a private ritual, sung to Nathan in the quiet of her apartment, her hand on her belly, dreaming of the boy she'd hold. How could Noah know it, unless... She pushed the thought away, not ready to hope, not ready to face the pain of hope dashed, but it lingered, persistent, a spark refusing to die. "Tell me about Miss Lila," she said gently, settling onto the floor with him, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Everything you can remember, sweetheart." Noah's words came haltingly at first, then in a rush, like a dam breaking, his small voice filling the study. "She was kind. She had gray hair, but not old gray, just shiny, like silver in the sun. She read me stories, ones about knights and dragons, castles in the clouds, heroes who saved people. She didn't yell, not like the others, and she gave me extra cookies when no one was looking, hid them in my pocket so the other kids wouldn't see." He paused, his fingers clutching his lion, its fur matted from years of comfort. "She said they took me from you, that they lied to make you think I was gone, that it wasn't your fault. She gave me the picture, told me to hide it, to never forget you, to keep it safe no matter what." After she left, the other foster parents got mad when I talked about it. They said I was making it up, that I didn't have a mom, that I was trouble. Emily reached for a notepad, jotting details with a trembling hand, her lawyer's mind cataloging every word: Lila's name, her hospital connection, her secrecy, the cookies, the stories. It was a thread to pull, a lead to follow, a lifeline in the dark. Tomorrow would bring investigations, tests, hard questions that might break her heart or rebuild it. But tonight, she held Noah, feeling a bond that defied logic, a certainty growing with every shared note of their lullaby, every tear they shed together. She carried him to the guest room, his weight light in her arms, and tucked him into bed, the quilt enveloping him like a promise. She sat beside him, humming their song until his breathing evened out, his face peaceful in sleep, the lion tucked under his chin, a silent guardian. The next morning, Lila Thornton arrived at Emily's house, her auburn hair streaked with silver, pulled back in a loose bun, her hands clutching a battered leather suitcase that sagged under its own weight. Her face was lined with years of guilt and resolve, her blue eyes bright with tears as she stopped short, seeing Noah peeking from behind Emily's legs, his dark eyes wide with recognition, a spark of memory igniting in their depths. "Oh, my God," Lila whispered, her voice breaking, tears spilling onto her cheeks, leaving tracks on her weathered skin. "You found each other. I knew you would, I prayed you would." Noah stepped forward, hesitant but drawn to her, his sneakers scuffing the hardwood floor. "Miss Lila?" His voice was small but clear, a spark of joy cutting through his usual caution, his hands clutching the hem of his jacket. Lila knelt, her hands trembling as she touched his shoulder, her fingers gentle, reverent. "Look how big you've gotten, sweet boy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew you'd find your mama someday, knew you'd be brave enough." Emily ushered them into the living room, where sunlight streamed through bay windows, casting patterns on the hardwood floor, warming the space with a golden glow. Daniel Reed and Clara Evans waited, seated on a plush cream sofa, notebooks and laptops at the ready, their faces a mix of anticipation and urgency. Noah stayed close to Emily, sitting on the couch beside her, his small frame pressed against her side, watching Lila intently as she opened her suitcase, revealing a trove of evidence, stacks of files bound with rubber bands, a USB drive nestled in a velvet pouch, a small album of photographs bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age. "I've been waiting 8 years for this day," Lila began, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes, her hands folding in her lap as she sat across from them. "I was a labor and delivery nurse at Crestview Hospital from 2010 to 2018, worked the night shift, saw babies come into the world, saw mothers' faces light up or break. It started small, or so they told us, telling mothers their babies hadn't survived, even when they had, claiming it was for the best. The administrators said we were helping place unwanted children with loving families, sparing mothers who couldn't cope, who weren't ready." Emily's hand found Noah's, grounding them both as anger flared in her chest, a fire that threatened to consume her composure. "But I wanted my baby," she said, her voice tight with suppressed fury, her fingers tightening around his. "I had a nursery ready, a name chosen, a life planned for him. I was ready to be his mother, to love him with everything I had." Lila nodded, her face shadowed with regret, her hands twisting together, knuckles whitening. "That's when I realized it was something darker, something wrong. They weren't just handling unwanted babies, they were stealing wanted ones, babies they deemed premium, for wealthy families willing to pay hundreds of thousands, sometimes more, for a child that fit their specifications, healthy, bright, perfect." Daniel leaned forward, his pen poised over his notebook, his dark eyes narrowing with focus. How many cases are we talking about, Lila? How big was this? At least 25 I documented personally between 2016 and 2019, Lila said, handing him the USB drive, her hand steady despite the weight of her words. Dates, names, payment records, hospital logs. I even managed to secretly record conversations with the administrators involved, hushed meetings in break rooms, calls late at night. But I know there were more, hundreds, maybe thousands over the years, stretching back decades. Clara took rapid notes, her pen scratching against the paper, her brow furrowed with concentration as Daniel plugged the drive into his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. Emily listened, horror growing, her heart pounding as Lila detailed the operation, her words painting a picture of calculated cruelty. Dr. Samuel Grant was the mastermind, Lila explained, her voice heavy with disdain. He was the head of obstetrics, charming, respected, the kind of man who walked into a room and owned it. Everyone trusted him, patients, staff, even the board. He worked with Bright Futures Agency to identify clients, rich couples desperate for a baby, willing to pay 6 figures for a perfect child, no questions asked. They targeted mothers who were educated, healthy, with desirable genetic backgrounds, doctors, lawyers, professors, but vulnerable in some way, single, widowed, without strong family support, women they could isolate and manipulate. Emily's mind flashed to her own pregnancy, David's death leaving her isolated, her only support her aging mother, too far away in Maine to hold her hand through the long nights. How did they choose, she asked, her voice barely concealing her rage, her free hand clenching into a fist. They had a system, Lila said, her voice grim, her eyes distant with memory. They'd monitor medical records, flag women who fit the profile, high IQ, no genetic diseases, stable careers. They'd track their pregnancies, wait for the right moment. When a suitable baby was born, they'd create a crisis, claim the baby was in distress, rush the mother into emergency surgery, pump her full of sedatives. While she was under anesthesia, they'd take the child, whisk it away through a back corridor to a private room, away from prying eyes. Later, they'd tell her it was stillborn, show her falsified records if she asked, wave a death certificate to silence doubts. Clara interjected, her pen pausing, her voice sharp with disbelief. But death certificates require oversight, autopsies, signatures, witnesses. How did they get away with it? They had people throughout the system, Lila said, her voice bitter, her hand spreading in a gesture of futility. Medical examiners who'd sign off without seeing a body, administrators who'd backdate paperwork, even a few cops who'd squash complaints, make them disappear. Bright Futures handled the other end, creating new birth certificates, forging adoption papers, placing the babies with paying clients, making sure all the documentation looked legitimate, airtight. Daniel whistled softly, scrolling through files on his laptop, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. The money trail's staggering, payments ranging from $200,000 to $600,000 per baby, funneled through offshore accounts, shell companies, even a fake charity called Hope's Promise. They bought yachts, estates, private planes with this money. Noah, who'd been listening quietly, his head resting against Emily's arm, his stuffed lion in his lap, spoke suddenly, his voice small but piercing, cutting through the adult's intensity. Is that why they took me? Because someone paid money for me? Emily pulled him into her lap, her heart breaking at the confusion in his eyes, her arms wrapping around him protectively. Lila leaned forward, addressing him directly, her voice soft but firm, her eyes locking onto his. No, sweet boy. They were greedy, selfish people who did a terrible thing, a horrible, unforgivable thing. But your mama loved you so much, always, even when she didn't know where you were, even when they tried to erase you from her life." Emily's voice hardened as she turned back to Lila, her anger a quiet fire. The Fosters, were they part of this scheme? Did they know what they were doing? Lila nodded, pulling out a file marked with red tabs, its pages creased from frequent handling. Noah's first buyers were the Thompsons, a couple from Greenwich, Connecticut. They paid $400,000 for him, wanted a healthy, bright boy to complete their perfect family. But when Noah got sick as a toddler, chronic ear infections, nothing serious but enough to inconvenience them, they decided he wasn't perfect enough, wasn't worth the trouble. They backed out, returned him like a defective product, and Bright Futures placed him with the Fosters, who were really Mark and Laura Gibbs, professional foster parents paid to keep trafficked kids in the system, to cover tracks if anyone asked questions, to keep them quiet. Lila reached into her suitcase one last time, pulling out a yellowed envelope, its edges brittle with age. "There's something else you should see," she said, handing it to Emily, her hand trembling slightly. Inside were photographs, tiny Noah, red-faced and squalling, wrapped in a hospital blanket, his eyes open, alert, his fists curled in defiance, moments after birth. His skin was pink, his hair a dark fuzz, his presence undeniable, alive. "He was 8 pounds, 3 ounces, Lila said, her voice breaking, tears spilling freely now. "Strong lungs, healthy appetite, a fighter from the start. Everything they told you about complications, about distress, it was a lie, Emily, a cruel, calculated lie." Emily traced her finger over Noah's newborn face, grief and love colliding in her chest, a tidal wave of emotion that threatened to drown her. The images were a gift and a wound, proof of what she'd lost, what had been stolen from her arms, her heart. "You took these?" she asked, her voice thick with tears, her vision blurring. "I knew his mother would want them someday," Lila said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice steadying. "I was there that night, saw them take him, saw Grant hand him to a nurse who whisked him away. I couldn't stop it, I was just a nurse, no power, no voice. But I could save this, proof he was alive, proof he was yours, proof they couldn't erase." The FBI descended on Crestview Hospital 3 days later, their black vans blocking the parking lot as agents swarmed the maternity ward, their boots echoing in the sterile halls. By noon, 12 staff members were in custody, including Dr. Samuel Grant, whose polished demeanor crumbled under the weight of handcuffs, his face pale as he was led away. Headlines erupted across the city, then the nation: child trafficking ring exposed at Crestview Hospital. The news spread like wildfire, reporters camping outside the courthouse, their cameras flashing like lightning, their shouts a cacophony of questions about the judge and the boy, about a conspiracy that seemed too monstrous to be true. Emily and Noah were whisked to a safe house, a secluded mountain cabin nestled among towering pines, its isolation a shield against the chaos, its air sharp with the scent of resin and earth. Armed FBI agents patrolled the perimeter, their radios crackling in the quiet, their silhouettes blending into the dusk. Threats had come swiftly, an anonymous call to Emily's office, its voice distorted, warning her to let it go. A letter slipped under her door, its words scrawled in red ink, promising retribution if she pursued the truth. Agent Karen Wells, a seasoned investigator with a no-nonsense edge and a scar above her left eyebrow, led the operation, dubbed Operation Stolen Bonds. She met with Emily in the cabin's small kitchen, spreading case files across a weathered pine table, her movements precise, her voice clipped. "Lila's evidence is a goldmine," Karen said, her fingers tapping a stack of printouts, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of unease. Recordings of Grant discussing inventory, photos of babies being handed to buyers in back rooms, ledgers tracking millions in payments to hospital staff, agency operatives, even a few politicians. We've got enough to bury him and half the hospital board, but it's bigger than Crestview, Emily. This goes nationwide. Emily nodded, her judicial mind cataloging the charges: kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy, human trafficking, racketeering, her hands clasped tightly to steady them. How deep does it go? She asked, glancing at Noah, who was coloring at the far end of the table, his crayons a splash of normalcy in the storm, his focus intense as he drew a house with a bright red roof. Deep, Karen said, pulling out a chart of financial transactions, its lines and arrows a web of corruption. Bright Futures wasn't just a foster agency, it was a front, a machine. They had ties to a deputy mayor who blocked audits for years, a state senator who fast-tracked their licenses in exchange for campaign funds, even a few judges who signed off on suspicious adoptions without blinking, taking cash under the table. We're looking at offshore accounts, luxury estates, a private island off the Bahamas, all funded by stolen lives. Daniel Reed, who joined them after a red-eye flight from Chicago, where he'd been chasing leads, added, I've traced payments to a nurse named Lila Thornton, small amounts, probably hush money to keep her quiet. She was smart, kept copies of everything, emails, memos, even a burner phone she used to record Grant. But she's not the only whistleblower. Two other nurses, Maria Delgado and Susan Chen, are talking now, scared but ready to testify. They've got stories that match Lila's, down to the corridors they used to move the babies. Noah's voice broke the tension, soft but clear, his crayon pausing mid-stroke. Did Miss Lila get in trouble for helping me? He asked, his eyes lifting to Emily, wide with worry, his small hand clutching a blue crayon. Emily reached for his hand, squeezing gently, her heart aching at his concern. No, sweetheart, she said, her voice warm, reassuring. Miss Lila's a hero, like a knight in one of her stories. She's helping us make sure the bad people can't hurt anyone else, ever again. Karen softened, leaning toward Noah, her stern features easing into something almost maternal. You're a hero too, Noah, she said, her voice gentler now. What you've told us, about the Fosters, the things you remember from their house, from before, it's helping us find other kids like you, kids who need their families. Noah's testimony, given in a quiet room at the safe house with Emily by his side, was a turning point, a beacon in the investigation's fog. He described the Gibbs home, locked bedrooms with heavy bolts, threats to stay silent about old stories, whispered conversations he'd overheard about keeping the kids in line, about buyers who paid good money. He recalled a nurse carrying him down a dark hallway at Crestview, her shoes squeaking on the tile, her arms tight around him, a memory that matched Lila's photos from the night he was stolen, a snapshot of betrayal frozen in time. His words, delivered with a child's clarity, gave investigators a roadmap to unravel the conspiracy, a thread to pull that unraveled the whole tapestry. The Fosters, revealed as Mark and Laura Gibbs, were arrested in a dawn raid, their polished facade crumbling under interrogation, their suburban mansion a crime scene taped off with yellow caution tape. They confessed to hiding trafficked children for profit, acting as a buffer between Bright Futures and prying social workers, their home a prison disguised as a haven, with hidden cameras in the ceilings and locked doors to control their charges. Their bank accounts, swollen with agency payments, told a story of greed, of lives traded for luxury cars and vacation homes. Emily spent hours with Karen and Daniel, poring over evidence in the cabin's living room, her judicial training a lifeline as the scope of the operation overwhelmed her, threatened to drown her in its enormity. The numbers were staggering: hundreds of babies stolen over 2 decades, sold for billions to wealthy families across the country, their identities erased, their mothers left to grieve empty cribs. Offshore accounts, luxury estates, even a private island off the Bahamas, all funded by shattered lives, by tears no one saw. A victim compensation fund, seeded with $2 billion in seized assets, was established to support families, to pay for therapy, education, new beginnings, but Emily knew money couldn't heal the deepest wounds, couldn't replace the years lost. Months passed, and the investigation grew into a national reckoning, a tidal wave of truth that swept across state lines, exposing similar schemes in California, Texas, and New York. Over 412 children were reunited with their families, each reunion a miracle echoing Noah and Emily's, each a testament to love's refusal to die. The safe house became a temporary home, its walls filled with Noah's drawings, bright suns, smiling stick figures, houses with red roofs and green gardens, a child's vision of safety. Emily launched the Forever Home Project, a non-profit advocating for adoption oversight, harsher trafficking penalties, and support for reunited families, therapy, legal aid, scholarships to rebuild shattered futures. Weekly support groups sprang up in community centers and church basements, where mothers shared stories of loss, empty nurseries, falsified papers, years of doubt, and children found friends who understood their pain, their fear, their tentative hope. Noah thrived, his silence giving way to laughter, his fear to curiosity, his guarded heart opening like a flower to sunlight. At 9, he befriended Mia, a girl recovered from a trafficking scheme in Seattle, her dark braids and quick smile a mirror to his own resilience. They spent hours in Emily's backyard, building forts from blankets and branches, trading secrets under the oak tree, teaching each other how to feel safe, how to trust again. Emily watched them, marveling at Noah's strength, his ability to find joy despite his scars, to offer it to others. Nightmares still came, triggered by loud noises, car horns, slamming doors, or unfamiliar faces in crowds, but he faced them with Emily by his side, their lullaby a beacon in the dark, a song that tethered him to her, to home. 1 year after that fateful day in courtroom 412, Emily stood before a packed convention hall in downtown Chicago, addressing the first national gathering of reunited families, an event organized by the Forever Home Project. The room was a sea of faces, mothers with tear-streaked cheeks, fathers holding children they'd thought lost, kids clutching stuffed animals and new memories, advocates and law enforcement officers united by a shared mission. The hall was vast, its ceiling arched with steel beams, its walls lined with banners proclaiming truth, justice, reunion. Emily's voice was steady, strong, amplified by the microphone, reaching every corner of the space. When Noah stood up in that courtroom and said, "You're my mom," he didn't just find his way home, she declared, her green eyes scanning the crowd, finding Noah in the front row, his smile bright. He started a movement that has exposed decades of corruption, torn down walls of lies, and brought 600 children back to their families, to the arms that never stopped waiting. Noah joined her at the podium, his hand slipping into hers, his confidence a stark contrast to the silent, trembling boy of a year ago. He stood on a small stool to reach the microphone, his dark curls catching the stage lights, his voice clear and strong, carrying a wisdom beyond his years. "I thought it was just our miracle," he said, his words echoing through the hall, "but now we help other kids find their moms, their dads, their homes. We help them not be scared anymore, because families are stronger than bad people, stronger than lies." The audience rose in a standing ovation, a wave of applause and tears, hands clapping, voices cheering, a chorus of hope and healing. Over 280 perpetrators had been convicted, doctors like Samuel Grant, serving 25 years in federal prison, nurses who'd turned a blind eye, facing a decade behind bars, agency workers like the Gibbs, sentenced to 15 years each for their role in the machine. The Victim Fund had distributed $500 million, funding therapy for children haunted by memories, education for those starting over, new beginnings for families piecing themselves back together. But the real healing, Emily knew, happened in moments like these: children laughing in the convention's playroom, mothers holding their babies again, fathers teaching their sons to ride bikes, families rebuilding what was stolen, brick by brick, hug by hug. That night, in their hotel room overlooking Lake Michigan, Emily watched Noah sleep, his stuffed bear from Mia tucked under his arm, its fur worn but loved. The city lights sparkled outside, a constellation of hope mirrored in the water below. A text from Clara lit up her phone, its words a quiet gift: "For more matches confirmed today. DNA results just in. Families meeting tomorrow." Emily smiled, tears prickling her eyes, imagining other mothers receiving the news she'd once dreamed of, the truth that their children were alive, waiting to be found, waiting to come home. She thought of the other children like Noah, carrying memories they'd been told to forget, now validated, now believed, their voices rising like a chorus. Noah's courage had sparked a revolution, exposing a truth too long buried, a light too bright to be extinguished. As Emily hummed their lullaby, its melody soft in the darkened room, she gave thanks for the miracle that brought them back together, and for the miracles still unfolding, one family at a time, across a nation waking to justice, to love, to the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child.